Hello, everybody. If you are here in Vevey, then you are here for our next session, which is on NF2 and communication technology. So just want everyone to get a minute to get settled. Excellent. Okay. I would love it if anyone who's staying, if you are comfortable, to please move closer to the front and to the middle. Thank you. It's a big room, and it's always going to be a smaller group. So let's kind of gather up in this area at your comfort level. Come on.
Yeah,
Yay.
Come on up. And if you can move to the middle, we love to have eye contact with our audience.
I think it's easier to see the captions over here for some.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
It's just a setup issue. You got it. We got it. Okay, so I am just going to introduce our poor McKinnon. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then I will let them take it away. Okay, so I just want to say, it's fine. I want to say I'm actually very excited about this panel because as someone who's been coordinating this meeting this weekend and trying to enact the vision of CTF to make our events more inclusive and to not have barriers up for our community, I have learned so much in the last 24 hours about all the things that I don't know and all the things that I don't see or think about. And I'm very grateful for this panel of experts to talk to us about this and to help us get better at this. So with that, let me do introductions. So first we have Tina Childress. Tina is an educator, audiologist in the mainstream and residential school settings. She's also an award-winning presenter, adjunct lecturer, mentor for children and adults, and is active on various local, state, and national boards and committees, as well as social media. As a late deafened adult with bilateral cochlear implants who is fluent in ASL, Tina is able to seamlessly navigate between the deaf and hearing worlds. Next to Tina, we have Dr. Heather Thompson. Heather is a licensed speech-language pathologist who comes to us from California State University in Sacramento. Her research interests include clinical trials, patient-reported outcome measures, speech-language development, and intervention for children with rhizopathies or cleft palate. And finally, I'm sure we all know who Matt is down here on the end. Matt is an NF2 patient and incredible advocate. He's a frequent speaker of lessons learned on his 25-year journey toward deafness and subsequent recovery with his auditory brainstem implant. Matt has proudly served as a congressional lobbyist for the NF research funding and is an active fundraiser for NF research by doing endurance events. Matt currently serves as the U.S. Director of Patient Advocacy for NF at Alexion. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Kate. And I have the good fortune of knowing most of the folks in this room. So I'm going to kick this off a little bit differently. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but to provide a little context before we do that, I know them both by reputation of both having worked within NF, but then the last 3 or 4 years being more involved in audiology. And so when I saw this session, I was excited and want you guys to know that they come from really hearing care in two very different directions. One from academic of really understanding the background of how we process hearing, and another from the doctor of audiology side of a more practical everyday with fitting hearing aids and understanding challenges that people have with hearing loss and the tools that are available to them. So what you're going to get more of today is not just here's a device I use. I'm going to do a little bit of that, but it's more of the rationale of why we hear this way and why this particular tool might not help, but this can. So I'm very excited to have a little bit different perspective than just simply putting up a list of here's some things on Amazon you should check out to make life easier. So with that, you guys want to introduce yourselves?
So good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, everybody. And Kate, I just realized that I don't know if the updated deck is being played because there is a QR code for the handouts, because I like to say that when I come up and do presentations, I'm basically dropping knowledge. There should be a slide before this that has a QR code for people to download the presentation to follow. It's okay. If you could maybe send it out in email or something, that would be great. So hi, everybody. I am an audiologist, as Matt mentioned. I am also a bilateral cochlear implant recipient. I did not lose my hearing due to NF. I lost my hearing due to something called autoimmune inner ear disease. And I'm a late deafened adult, so I was 30 when it all started happening. So I talk about topics like this from a consumer as well as a professional perspective. So I tell my story, you know, like Matt and I will be sharing, you know, the different gadgets that we use. My nickname is Techie Tina. If there is a gadget out there, I probably have it. And I feel like my role in this world and in my life and in this career is to take all of that complicated information that audiologists and clinicians do with all the acronyms and all of that and make it understandable. I hope that when we are done with this session, you will have learned at least one new thing that you can implement right away. And so the framework for pretty much everything I do is to empower you to find information because you know you better than anyone else. And we'll talk about the importance of knowing what works for you as opposed to someone making decisions for you.
My name is Heather Thompson. I'm acting department chair in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at California State University, Sacramento. And my role is to provide information to speech pathologists and audiologists about NF1 and NF2, how to facilitate communication. I'm also really interested in communication-related outcomes for clinical trials, particularly as it pertains to how a tumor of the head and neck might impact speech, hearing, and swallowing. And that's what we do as speech-language pathologists. And I'm also really interested in clinical education and clinical training of speech pathologists so that everyone knows when they exit the profession about NF and how to care for patients with NF. And so it's just such an honor to be here today.
Thank you, guys. When we talked about how to break this up, reflecting back on my own hearing loss journey, the questions and concerns that I had leading up to my hearing loss were totally different than what I had after my hearing loss. And I wanted to know, what can I do to prepare for this? And then once it happened, I wasn't prepared at all. And then after I lost my hearing, there were a whole new world of questions, and I wanted to know, what can I do now that this is what my world is like? So we're going to break out today a little bit in how to do the pre and then how to manage the post, and hopefully give you some resources that you can take away. And as I mentioned, you don't need to take notes. You can, eyes up. That's the way we all listen. And that you can have some coping skills. And even if we don't have the answer for you, to give you some things to start thinking about of, I never really thought about approaching a group setting that way. I could see how that could help me or my child or the person that with hearing loss that I'm around, or even my dad, who we all know has hearing loss and denies it. So with that, you want to start this?
So the first thing that we'd like to talk about is, how do you prepare for the possibility of a hearing loss diagnosis? So in order to talk about hearing loss and also talk about communication, we need to first, when we talk about communication in NF, we have to first talk about just communication in general. And so we have two areas. We have input, and this is how we receive information. So we can receive information in the visual modality, by looking, by watching, by actively attending to our environment and the people in it. We can get information through the auditory modality by listening. And we also receive input through kinesthetic tactile or gestural communication. So when somebody waves to us, when they give us a thumbs up, we're receiving that communication. And so one of the things I want to highlight is we're constantly using, and we want to use, all modes of communication. We also have processing that happens in our brain when we receive these various inputs. And so our brain is consolidating all of this information, and then it helps to formulate a response, which would be our output. And output can be in a variety of ways. We can write, we can text, so it's that written modality. We can have output through the verbal modality by talking, and then also gestural communication such as sign, or even kinesthetic communication such as braille. So we have different outputs that we have as well. And so we can use all of these inputs and outputs. What I want to highlight is multimodal communication, which is using all of these things together to maximize ease of communication. We want communication to be easy, okay? And so when we're preparing for a diagnosis of hearing loss, we want to think multimodal right now, okay? All right, next slide. Okay, so communication disorder is the ability and inability to receive, send, process, or comprehend concepts related to the verbal or auditory modality or graphic symbol systems. And anybody is at risk of having a communication disorder at some point in their life. It can be mild to profound, it can affect individuals across the lifespan, and communication disorder can also be temporary in that we may lose function of a certain body region until we regain that ability through therapies, through technology, through implants or devices. We may have a temporary communication disorder. So it's how we handle that as we move forward that's important to think about. We know that communication disorder is common among individuals with NF. Okay.
One of the things that I love that she's saying is communication disorder and not hearing loss. Because, and I'm guessing a lot of you with hearing loss out there, there's the assumption of, oh, if I just talk louder. But if you talk louder, I'm just going to hear jumbled, confusing sounds even louder. I have problem with speech understanding. My volume is fine. So that's an important distinction that she does a good job of making, is that hearing loss is just one small part of a communication disorder. And I think that's what many of us in this room deal with.
And so this comes to my slide talking about extrinsic and intrinsic factors. So some of the extrinsic factors that I've listed on there are things that are in your environment. Sometimes you can control it and sometimes you can't. A great example of a barrier to communication are these masks, right? The masks keep us safe though. I would rather not get COVID, not get monkeypox, not get whatever is out there. Keep you guys safe also, for those of you that are immunocompromised, which means that I have to come up with a way to better communicate with you. You know, one way that I do that, I'm going to show you on my app right now, is if I'm talking to someone that's deaf or hard of hearing, I will use my app and I'll just hold it here underneath my chin. And you will be able, it's like I have a personal closed captioning box, you know? And the other thing I want to say to you as someone that's also a consumer, give yourself grace. There are times when I go out in public without my cochlear implants, and you know what happens? People accommodate me instead of me struggling to accommodate them. You know, I go to the grocery store and they hear me talk. My speech is not affected by my hearing loss at this time. It was before, but all I would see is their mask moving and I'd be leaning in and struggling. It was so empowering to go to the grocery store and just point at my ear and go like this. You know what they did? They pointed. They gave me thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay, so if you're struggling, feel free to just not talk and just point to your ears if you're having a really, really bad day. Okay, and that's some of the intrinsic factors like Matt was talking about as well. You cannot control necessarily your speech understanding. You may be maxed out on your technology. Give yourself grace.
Okay, so there's a number of different factors that we want to think about, those intrinsic and extrinsic factors. And so we want to create an opportunity for multimodal communication. And I want to break down exactly what that is. So this is communication while using verbal, gestural, kinesthetic, and different types of augmentative alternative communication options or technologies. We use multimodal communication along with things like modifying our environment to promote effective listening, using technology that helps us to listen and speak and communicate well. We also want to think about the role of the listener and listener training. And as a patient, we can train and provide information to our listeners about how they can be amazing listeners in the communication interaction with us. We also want to think about our role as a speaker and strategies that we can learn to promote effective speaking. So things like slowing down, reducing rate, giving captioning the opportunity to catch up with us. We don't have to speak with, as Tina mentioned, a machine gun pace. Is that what you had said earlier?
Machine gun on fire.
Machine gun on fire.
Right? There are some people that talk like a machine gun on fire.
So we're just, everybody calm down and just keep a really easy rate of speech. And that helps as well. And then the last part is practice, really thinking about practicing multimodal communication from the start. Like, for example, I might have talking and listening skills while using, and this is for a patient population, using an implantable hearing device or hearing aid, while also using speech-to-text technology or braille-to-speech technology while going out for dinner with friends. And think, let's make an environment that's multimodal from the start. And that's really universal design for living, right? Or another one is using a tactile alarm system. So we might use a shake awake or a vibrating alarm on our wrist if that is something that works for you, or under your pillow. But then also use a traditional alarm clock, because why not have multimodal options so that if one is no longer available, you still have the other one. And it's just a habit, and it's easy now because you do it all the time.
So, and when you mentioned, and I give her a hard time about how much she loves the phrase multimodal, and I didn't know what it meant. And so when we first met, I said, I don't know if I'm using multimodal, but one of the things that really helped my auditory brainstem implant processing was I started watching YouTube videos of songs that I knew before I lost my hearing loss, and I would Google that song plus the word karaoke. Well, when you add karaoke, you get the words to the song as well. So I was watching Simon and Garfunkel performing live at Central Park, where I could see them singing. My brain remembered them hearing. I could hear a little bit of what they were saying, and I could see the captions. And so I said, I did that. And she's like, yeah, that's multimodal, Matt. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And the other, I use this when I travel because I don't have my wife to elbow me, but to wake me up. And it's just a shake awake. But at home, I have an alarm clock called the Sonic Boom. And it's about a 6 by 6 by 6 inch cube that has a disc that goes under the mattress. It has an alarm at like 120 decibels, and I can plug a lamp into it. So in the morning when that goes off, it's like a one-man band. I mean, it's just this cacophony of sound and light and vibration. So you can imagine how much my family loves that. So those tools are out there, and the Sonic Boom is great, although I don't recommend traveling the month after 9/11 with a big wired device called a Sonic Boom in your carry-on bag. You're gonna need some extra time to get through security with that guy.
Yeah. And as a technophile, I'm here to tell you also, there are lots of different devices that can work for whatever you have. How many of you use your cell phones as an alarm? Okay. There is a little cradle. This is what I use when I travel and what I have at home also, where I can sit my phone in this cradle and it detects the vibration from my phone, which connects to the bed shaker, right? So you can use what you have. At the end of this presentation, I'm realizing we have a lot to get through, but at the end of this presentation, I also have a list of vendors so that you know where you can go to find some of these products. And these are companies that cater to the deaf and hard of hearing community. So I've kind of done all that research for you for that, and what I think are good companies as well. So I vetted them. And so we're gonna keep going.
I was referring people to your website long before I ever met you. I don't know who this lady is, but she's got a wealth of information online. So it really is a terrific resource.
So who is part of your multimodal team? You have audiology. An audiologist is responsible for the identification, prevention, and intervention for hearing and balance conditions. And you also have a speech language pathologist who's responsible for the assessment and treatment for individuals who have speech, language, hearing, and swallowing and cognitive communication concerns. Both of these disciplines provide auditory assessments and rehabilitation services. Speech language pathologists can provide intervention for oral rehabilitation in the form of treatment. And oral rehabilitation is essentially restoring or optimizing listening conditions or people's participation in activities that are limited by hearing concerns. And so oral rehabilitation can be obtained, like these services can be obtained at a variety of stages that we'll next talk about.
So, when I think about oral, and it's funny, there's oral, O-R-A-L, and there's oral, A-U-R-A-L. So basically, speech therapists are able to teach you how to hear again. If your hearing status has changed, if you got a new device and it doesn't make sense, which I'll talk about in a little bit as well. How many of you here have a hearing aid or a cochlear implant or an ABI? Okay. We forgot to ask this in the beginning as well. How many people here are people that have NF or have a loved one with NF? Okay. How many of you have loved ones or have NF2? Okay. How many are clinicians or practitioners that work with people with NF? Okay. So we wanted to kind of like scan our audience as well as we tailored this. So thank you for that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about making connections. And you know what? I really don't have to say anything because these sessions have gone way above and beyond what I have learned about making connections. You are in exactly the right place. You have learned about practitioners and experts in the field connect with each other. I mean, the other great thing about having workshops and meetings in person again is that you can actually, like Matt talks about, being able to buy someone a beer and you learn about $100 worth of medical advice, right? So keep doing what you're doing. For a list of practitioners, I learned about this yesterday, the NF Collective actually has a place where you can type in what kind of expert that you're looking for. You can search by geographic region. So definitely check that out.
Okay, so some things that we want to think about prior to a diagnosis of hearing loss or hard of hearing status. One is there's options for communication. These involve a team of people and a community. So sign language is one option, but remember, if you're learning sign language, the individuals that you communicate with are going to want to learn sign language also because you need to have people to talk with. So it's a group project. Bring your friends, bring your family, everyone go and receive ASL and work on ASL if this is a modality that you wish to begin in. Also, oral rehabilitation, you can receive services on listening devices and different technologies. Your audiologist and speech language pathologist can help find a set of technology that works for you for communication based on your specific needs, whether it's like a speech to text or braille to speech or a tap to talk or different screen readers like Dragon or Buttons, Go Talk Pro, Prolo to Go. That's a icon tap to speech output device. So there's lots of options, more than I have time for. You can also receive auditory only speech perception training, which is active intervention on how to listen using auditory only speech cues. There's also lip reading and speech reading. Again, speech reading meaning, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then communication strategies to maximize communication, things like using captioning, having heavy curtains in a room where there's a presentation dampens extra noise and makes it for a better, softer listening condition. Facing your speaker so that listening can happen as well as getting visual cues on that speech is key. So notice I'm looking at Tina, I'm looking at Matt when he's talking because I'm getting all of those cues. So that's what speech intervention in the area of oral rehab will provide. Okay, excellent.
So when I'm able to share the QR code with you, basically it's a link to a Google folder, and in that folder, I sent it out in Google. Oh, okay. So the comment was, Kate said that she sent it out in Whova so that you can access it. And so, yes. Oh, okay. So I think the comment Dr. Larson has is the app that I'm using included in that list? Yes, I'll talk about that in a minute. And so in that folder as well, I kind of made a list of sign language resources. So if you want to learn sign language, there are online classes, you can do in-people classes. I have some tips and tricks. The thing about learning sign languages is you need to have realistic expectations. All of you that are in this room were born with normal hearing, maybe a little bit of hard of hearing, as opposed to being born deaf. So your native language is going to be spoken English or spoken other language, okay? And so learning a sign language later can be difficult. And as Heather said, you need to have someone to practice with if your goal is to become fluent, okay? So as an audiologist, I was lucky that I learned sign language. I was actually an engineer first. And I took a sign language class, and that's how I learned it. My whole family signs, my kids sign. I am in the deaf community, so I am fluent. Yes, if you are not around a lot of other deaf people who sign, you're probably not going to become fluent, okay? But there are times when sign language can be so important. So like, especially with masks, right? Like one of my favorite signs is this, which is a sign for finished. Wouldn't it be great if you could just look at your spouse because you're at this place where you're completely overwhelmed, and instead of going like this, which is more like a gesture and people will know what you're saying, you could just make eye contact and just sign this and your spouse will know, right? If your spouse is being annoying, stop. I use this with my kids, right? So there is a time and a place for certain signs. It can also be a great bridge to communication if you're not able to hear something. So take a look at those resources when you have time.
This is, in fact, came from an opposite perspective where no one I knew learned sign. And when my neurosurgeon said, I think you need to go learn sign, I didn't, because why would I go learn a language no one else I know learns? I'm going to just stand in front of a mirror and sign to myself. I mean, the letters would all be backwards, right? Like, what am I saying? So I took my wife and my best friend in Chicago went and took sign. And if anybody knows me, my wife is much brighter than I am. And she picked it up very quickly. And I was frustrated because I wasn't learning it fast enough. And I only learned a little bit. But to your point, it was wonderful. I mean, just being able to sign yes, no, the first letter of a name, like, oh, this is, my wife is Nora, not Laura. being able to finger spell a single letter is shockingly convenient. We can go to a wedding reception and I can say, "More wine, please," from across the room when my wife's waiting in line to get a drink and I'm all the way on the other side. It also, when I'm around her or my friend, even knowing a little bit of sign, this event is physically exhausting for me at times, and I'm sure many of you, because it takes so much energy just to hear, like just to do something a 6-month-old can do is exhausting. Forget about everything else that we're doing. So I have to take breaks. Being able to sit with someone and sign a few words of like, "How are you?" or "Is everything okay?" is just so nice. It's so peaceful. It's so less stressful. So your goal doesn't need to be fluent. I'm far from fluent, but I would recommend it. I can assure you, based on my experience, the return on the investment of your time to learn a little bit is worth it. Yeah, Tracy.
Wait, hang on. Thank you. We need to use the microphone so that the captioners can hear what you're saying. Thank you.
I have a quick question. One is a suggestion. Pinterest is awesome for sign language. They have so much sign language on Pinterest and learning sign language. It's amazing. But anyway, cued speech. Somebody told me you can go for a weekend with family members or whatever for cued speech. I want to know your thoughts on cued speech and if you think that's worth taking the time to go do.
I think anything that is going to make a speaking and listening environment easier and works for you is going to be of benefit. Tina, what are your thoughts on that?
So I've taken a couple of cued speech classes and I've forgotten a lot because I have not been practicing. What cued speech is there are different hand shapes around the different parts of your mouth. And the purpose of cued speech is to make what's on your lips visible. Because, Heather will be talking about lip reading, saying the word pat, P-A-T, versus the word bat, B-A-T. It looks the same, but if you cue it, it will look different depending on the hand shapes. Okay. The advantage of cued American English, that's another term, is that it follows English word order. So if you're fluent in spoken English, that may be a tool, but you have to have someone to practice with and someone that can cue with you. Because it's not about you cueing expressively, meaning like you communicate in cue. You can't understand that person over there, but can they cue? Okay.
Thank you.
The best thing you can do, or the best choice, is to do the thing that you're actually going to use. If you learn it and file it away, it doesn't matter what's best. So my just personal experience, I've never met anybody that used cued speech ever. And I went through the same thing. They were like, "Oh, well, this is easier and more practical." I've never heard, we're talking about audiologists who are deaf, who have done this their whole career, and they've taken a couple of classes. That probably is the best explanation of how common cued speech is in my world. But if you find that works for you, then that is the best thing to use.
Great question. Thank you so much for that. So oral rehabilitation, at what point is oral rehabilitation going to be something that you may want to engage in? So when transitioning to a new device, when there's a change in hearing status, these are times that oral rehabilitation might be appropriate. What does it involve? Listening devices and technology, auditory-only speech perception and auditory training, audio-visual speech perception and speech reading training, and then communication strategies. That's a brief overview. Because of time, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but please speak to me afterwards and I can unpack this a little bit more. So listening devices and technology.
So when I will be talking about some of these realms, I'm going to be talking about it basically in these types of situations. What kinds of things should you think about for home, for school or work, as well as the community? But first, this is, okay.
Okay, so we'll just briefly go through auditory-only speech perception and auditory training is essentially developing patients' ability to use contextual cues, both in the word or in sentences, to have better hearing and listening. I'm going to pass it back to Tina for more detail in a moment. Let's go to speech reading. So speech reading is essentially using all of the cues of your environment and in your listening context to be able to understand a speaker. So things that affect listening include the visibility of speech sounds. Some speech sounds are very visible, like p, and some are less visible, like k, right? And so it's learning how to identify certain words using speech cues. And also understanding co-articulation. So this is something that as an individual who's in rehab, oral rehab, you'll learn. So it's learning, it's about practicing, and then it's about patience. And so it's important that you're always using the full context in your listening. Okay, so communication strategies. This is probably the biggest take-home message for this talk that I'll provide right now. So think multimodal right now. I think about tests are tests. Life is not a test. Having a notebook with notes is not cheating. It's using a resource. If you need to take notes to remember, to help learning and listening, take notes. If you want to use captioning in conjunction with a device, in conjunction with sitting at the front of the room, along with using visual and gestural cues, use everything all at once. It's not cheating, it's life, right? Stay up to date with current results and current events and topics so that you know what's likely to be discussed at the dinner you're going to, so that you can participate actively in the conversation. 1, sit facing your conversational partner. At dinner, sit across the table from people that you're listening to. Sit with your back to the wall. Hopefully if there's like some fabric behind you, that's really helpful for decreasing noise of ambient restaurant noise, that sort of thing. Watch facial expressions. Think about good lighting. So when you go out for dinner a little bit earlier, when it's brighter out and it's lighter and they haven't dimmed the lights in the restaurant yet. Maybe sit outside. It's also less busy and there's less noise during non-peak times. So this is just one example. Think about how can you make listening easier? Sit with your better ear beside your conversational partner and your back to the rest of the room. Schedule one-on-one meetings.
Yeah. We could talk for 2 hours about this side. And when I walk into any room, almost like Jason Bourne, I walk in and now do this inadvertently in seconds. I know the quietest spot in the room. You know, earlier you saw me sitting over there, my back's to the wall. I like having curtains behind me. If I'm in a restaurant and I see an acoustic guitarist, I'm staying away from that dude. I immediately identify, and with practice, it becomes very easy that I can walk into any room and have this weird skill that I can tell you exactly where the quietest seat is. The bus boy, well, stay away from the kitchen, stay away from the coffee grinder at Starbucks. I get to meetings 10 minutes early, and that's not because I'm diligent or respectful of your time. It's because I want to pick where we're going to sit, and it makes an impact on how the entire rest of the conversation goes.
And one of my favorite things to do is to go to conferences like this, or conferences where there are other deaf and hard of hearing people, because we all get it. It's really funny watching us sit at a restaurant, because I'll point, like, which side do you want to sit on? Where's your hearing aid? And so, but they also take the time. I think all of us that have hearing loss get frustrated when other people are frustrated, right? We don't want to be a burden. We don't always want to call attention to ourselves. Some people are very bold and just say, I can't hear, you need to face me, and they are very bold in that. And I think that's great. I do realize that our slides that we have is very different than what's on the thing. It's okay, Kate. And so, but I do want to say that in the different realms and the things that we talk about, when we think about these 3 types of environments, I like to approach it, any type of technology, assuming I can't hear anything. right? Because there are times when our hearing aids run out of batteries, or the ear mold is plugged up, or the cochlear implant dies, or the auditory brainstem battery, is not working, or there's a cable that's loose or something. And I'm just here to tell you that there are solutions for all of these types of things to make those situations easier to hear. So I know that some of you are like, Tina, tell me some technology. So when I am with hearing people, I'm doing this now because I know we're running out of time. I use my speech to text app daily. I've been using it throughout this conference because I think it does a great job. I have an Android phone. This app is called Live Transcribe. Matt has an iPhone. His favorite app is Otter. Okay, so those are two apps that I think will cover pretty much everybody. Know that there are alarm clocks. There are ways to make speech, bring it a little bit more clarity, especially in noisy situations. We call that remote microphone technology, okay? So this next slide, you know what though, it's 11:52. So Kate, how do you want to do this? We're out of time already. Okay, so the comment was to go ahead and keep going. Well, hang on. Do you mind if we get through our slides first? Just in the interest of time, we are happy to stay afterwards and talk. Okay, thank you. Okay, so do you want to, did we talk about this?
Yep.
Or okay.
Yeah.
So Matt, this is you.
Trying to get it to work. I have what I'm messing with right now. So you guys have seen Live Transcribe and things. I can't get the right Wi-Fi network. This is just my kids wanted to watch movies in the backyard. And so I looked online for like a little projector. And when I saw that you could screen share, I thought, well, wait a minute. If I use Otter, OTTER is my kind of go-to voice recognition software. Which is the best I have found for iPhones. And I can screen share to a backyard. I mean, this is a smart TV, but it projects up to 14 feet, and I can screen share my phone to this device. And so everywhere I go now, sorry, no offense, we have these wonderful captionists, but I can't put her in my pocket. I can put this in my pocket, and everywhere I go, in an effort to sort of be the change you want to see of, would it be great if every room was captioned? You can do that now. So I'll show it to you after, or I'll figure out a place to just so you can get an idea. So the upside is you have this mobile captioning device that you can share in a room, because maybe you go to an event where there's going to be other people with hearing loss, or even if you don't know, there's probably going to be somebody in the room with hearing loss. And you have the added benefit of when you're not doing that, you can project YouTube and movies from Netflix on your wall. So this is called the Nebulous, which also sounds cool. No, Nebula.
Okay, so I'm going to talk quickly about the three types of personal amplification that all of you with NF2 either have or are contemplating. So most of you are going to start out with hearing aids unless you have a tumor that, just kind of takes all of your hearing all in one shot. Okay, so hearing aids can amplify up to a certain point, and it relies on responses of these things called hair cells in your cochlea. Okay, there gets a point where depending on, like where your hearing loss happens, if it happens at the hearing nerve, some people are able to benefit from a cochlear implant. My friend Ken Arcia over here is one of those people. And so his hearing nerve still had some function, and so he was able to benefit from a cochlear implant. Now, if your hearing nerve is completely, they have to take off the tumor and that hearing nerve is no longer viable, the next option would be an auditory brainstem implant, which is what Matt has. And so my point is that, there are options for the different kinds of of hearing loss that you have. The thing about hearing aids and cochlear implants and ABIs, I like to say I always have high hopes, but I have low expectations. There is no guarantee that you're going to be successful. By all means, people would look at me and be like, oh my gosh, Tina, you are an amazing cochlear implant recipient. You can hear in the car, we can have a conversation, and you don't seem to be struggling. But my trajectory was very different. You know, Matt is also very successful with his ABI. And so I just want to temper, you know, our abilities with realistic expectations, because as an audiologist, as a clinician, that is the hardest part for me, is that counseling part. I don't want to set you up for failure either, okay? But I want you to know that, you know, there's a range of abilities, okay, with these different devices. So moving on, in terms of audiological support, let me see what. This is where the empowering comes in. I want you to know about your device. Know that, can you say that you have a Phonak P50 SP? Can you say that you have an Advanced Bionics Naida Marvel? And the reason is you need to know the name of your device so that you can find information. You know, it's not just a cochlear implant. It's not just a hearing aid. And the importance of this is all of the manufacturers have resources specific to your device that you can leverage, okay? The other thing that I find with consumers, you know, we have like 3, 4, 5 programs on our personal amplification. How many people here can tell me what's on program 1, what's on program 2, 3, 4, 5? So I'm gonna tell you a secret. Audiologists, when we program your hearing aids and implants and ABIs, we can print out what we call a programming page. And I preach this to my colleagues. Give your patients the programming page so that you know what happens when you switch to program 3. Why does it sound different? Where can I use it? Okay, so knowing your device is really important. And going along with oral AURAL rehabilitation, you are going to learn faster and do better if you are active in practicing. You know, you can learn any language if you just sit there. Like if I plopped you in the middle of China and you wanted to learn Mandarin, you could learn it after hearing it for like 1,000 hours or something like that, but you will learn it faster if you have a coach, if you do practice, if you do targeted listening, okay? So moving on, in terms of technology options, definitely talk to your audiologist about different things that are there. I'm also gonna recommend that you go and look at the websites for different hearing loss related advocacy groups. I mean, CTF is great, talking about, you know, the tumor part of it. You know, we've kind of addressed some of the hearing part of it, but you will also get a lot more advocacy and technology and other kind of information from these groups. Like, I didn't know about CTF. How many of you didn't know that there were groups like Hearing Loss Association of America? Ken and I are both on the executive board for a group called the Association of Late Deafened Adults. Our conference is in October in San Diego. I know this is a plug, but we actually have quite a few members that have NF2. Actually, one of the founders for ALDA was here in Chicago, had NF2. Okay, so we have a very strong tie to this community. Use social media, get on some of these hearing loss forums and communities. There is never a stupid question. You know, so many people are like, I can't remember how to turn this on. What do I do? Okay, so definitely ask that. And like I said, the different manufacturers also have resources. And I'm sorry we're running over time. We just have a couple more slides. So, you know, Matt mentioned, I have this tendency to make lists and resources. So this is my website. It's called See Hear Communications, and the website is tinachildressaud.com. And so I have a lot of lists. One of the more popular lists is talking about apps. And these are apps that help people that are deaf or hard of hearing. There's a whole bunch of different topics. And hopefully you will find something there. I do have a resources page too with tips on how to do a Zoom meeting with captioning. You know, how do you, what are some cell phone plans that cater to people that are deaf or hard of hearing? All of that is kind of on there. And then some other last resources that are really fast. If you're just so new to this, I put up search terms for you because, as you know, I said before, clinicians have this tendency to use acronyms and words that are not the same words that you guys might use to describe stuff. So I put up some good Google terms so that you can find more information. If you are going to college or you're trying to find a job, there are some resources up there as well, and some of those hearing loss advocacy groups. And then lastly, here is the list of different vendors for different products for things that you might be able to use. That last link is also for financial assistance. I started making a list of places that can help you pay for hearing aids, or to pay for college, or to pay for some of this assistive technology. And that's another thing. You may see the term ALD, which stands for assistive listening device, but in the field now, we are also using the term assistive technology or hearing assistive technology. So my apologies for my colleagues and the way that we keep changing terms.
So it's such a great list, and so we'll turn that over now to Heather. If there's anything you want to add to kind of wrap this up so we can all go get some food.
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to a diagnosis of a hearing concern, remember to proactively find your team, which can include audiology and speech language pathology, among other health professionals. And your team is your family, your friends, colleagues, collaborators. Think of them as members of your communication team. Begin to use multimodal communication strategies as soon as you can. Remember, it's not cheating. And finally, after a diagnosis of hearing concern, remember to use multimodal whenever possible. Learn about options for audiological support and also oral rehabilitation, and then try as much as you can to stay up to date on technology. But ultimately, you don't need the latest and greatest. What you need is just something that works for you. So thank you so much for the time.
We're going to be around. We're going to be around today, so if you have any questions, and I would qualify it by saying, remember, they're both doctors, and I'm just a dude that wants to hear better, so keep that in mind when you ask questions. Just a few things that I thought, gosh, we could keep going. For the caregivers or parents who are probably wondering, what can I do to help my loved one? I would say, you know, to the sign language thing, avoid planning things in groups of 3 because somebody's always left out. And it's usually the person that can't hear. If you say something and you know they didn't catch what you said, when you repeat it, phrase it a different way. Because now they've got, I don't know if that counts as multimodal, but you've now got something, your brain is processing things in 2 different ways that are kind of similar. That's always very helpful for me. And then the last thing, if you do have hearing loss, and this is how I once had a cavity filled without Novocaine. I spent a lot of time nodding and smiling. And when the first person came in and said, "Did you get your shot?" and they were wearing a mask, I nodded and smiled. And then when the doctor came in and said, "Did she give you your shot?" I nodded and smiled. And when the third person came in, I nodded and smiled. And they started drilling without, and it was entirely my fault. They did everything they were right. I confirmed 3 times that they had done that. And that's just one example. It happens a million times a day. It's okay to say, I didn't understand. It's, you know, maybe if you're at the gas station, you can let those slide. But when you're at a doctor's office or something like that of such importance, it is okay to say, I didn't get that. And if they're annoyed, so what? Annoy them. It's your right and responsibility to make sure you are doing what is in the best interest of your health. So.
And I'm going to say too, for those of you that are parents, it's never too early to start training on assistive technology. You do not want to be following your kids to college to wake them up in the morning. There are alarm clocks that can do that for you. Okay, so getting your kids involved, finding one of those cool shaking alarm clocks that look like Batman or have like a glittery heart on it. There are products like that. Okay, so empower your children, teach them from the beginning. Okay, so we're going to end.
Thank you guys very
just,
much. And thank you to CTF for bringing these folks in.
Thank you so
we're
much.
really lucky to have such great perspectives on this. So thank you guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.